Hey friends, welcome back to another episode of KPC Podcast here. We're discussing Luke 5, which is probably getting a little bit old at this point. But we're through chapter 5, and so we've got some good discussion today around how Luke wraps up this chapter. Powerful story, interaction between Jesus and Pharisees. Again, this is a continuation of Jesus calling Levi, and Levi throwing a big party, and then the Pharisees kind of looking at what's happening and not being sure of what Jesus is doing and whether he ought to be doing it. And so I think it's a great conversation, and hopefully today really practical. So we did receive a few questions. We're going to jump into those from you, and so I would just use this opportunity to say, if you want to continue to send us questions, we love that. So it was easy. We woke up and there were already questions ready to go for our discussion this morning. So if you want to pause, you can hit pause, reread Luke 5:33 to the end of the chapter, and there's about 33 to 39. And from here, we're going to pause into Easter. We're going to Palm Sunday, Easter Sunday. We're going to be outside of the Gospel of Luke, so a little bit of a rest from our working through. And then following Easter, on the 27th, I think it is, we're going to be jumping back in chapter 6, verse 1, and Jesus is going to be talking about the Sabbath. So we're going to hop into our conversation, and we hope that this encourages you today and into the week ahead. We hope that it gives you maybe a few questions for you to wrestle with yourself, think through, pray through, and also discuss with some friends or family, maybe even around a meal. Celebrate, like Levi throws a big party, so we're moving into a season of celebration and partying, and Easter's a good season for that. So.
It's good. So before we get to this week's passage, we did have a brief question connected to last week in the story of Levi, and as a tax collector who throws this big party. And the question is from one of our students here at Courtright, and I will use basically how they said it was, what's with the two names? You alluded to the fact that Levi is also known as Matthew, and so yeah, what's with the two names? And I thought I knew, and then I dug a little deeper and realized it's actually more complicated, but we don't need to make it super complicated. So yeah, let's chat about that for a sec.
Yeah, what's with the two names? So first off, I think many of the disciples have two names.
Yes.
So that's worth saying. Matthew, Levi is not the only disciple with two names.
We've got Simon Peter,
Thomas, Didymus, the twin, literally means the twin, and many others. So Judas has a couple different names. I think maybe even 3 or 4 according to some traditions. So it's a common thing in Jesus's day for there to be multiple names. Some of it is linguistic, Greek versus say like a Hebrew name. Levi is a Hebrew name, and then you've also got Greek names that work their way in, but also Aramaic names. And just one thing that we don't talk a lot about is that the New Testament is written in Greek. The Old Testament is written in Hebrew, but there's mostly. But there's other languages that are being spoken around both of those, like throughout all of that history. So you've got Aramaic, which would be the sort of general spoken language in Jesus's day.
It was a Semitic language. It had some similarities to Hebrew. Yeah.
And we see some of it pop up here and there. When Jesus is on the cross, he speaks Aramaic and quoting Hebrew. So it some of it is just language that you've got Hebrew, you've got Greek, you've got Aramaic, and all of that is influencing culture and names. You've got nicknames, clarifying names. James, the brother of Jesus. So some of it is just that. So Levi, Matthew, he's not unique in a way that we really should be paying like abundant attention to it. Worth noting that, I might get this backwards, but Levi and Matthew both have pretty interesting meaning to their names. Matthew means gift of God, and Levi means one who is joined to God. And so at times people have kind of leaned into the meaning behind those names. So you have in Mark and in Luke, this guy's named Levi. He is joined to God and then becomes a gift of God, right? That becomes a gift to him. He becomes a gift to many, many others. You also have, in Matthew, he refers to himself as Matthew. And that just could be, it is unique to Matthew. Like Mark he's Levi in Mark, and he's Levi in Luke. And maybe you just like Matthew better. It's not as simple as one of my kids, depending on the day, she uses her full name. Depending on the day, she uses her sort of shortened nickname. And it really just depends on how she's feeling in the day. If she wants to be a bigger kid, or, some of that. I think, though, and here's where I'll throw it back to you. There have been, and I don't think we want to go fully down this rabbit hole. There have been some who suggest that he's not the same person, and that I don't buy that. I don't see it it's possible. Yeah. I don't see it inside of Scripture. He seems to be one. It's one or the other. And it's pretty clear in Matthew he's Matthew, in Luke he's Levi, in Mark he's Levi, and it's not like it's going back and forth, or that there are different stories where where the name is changing. And certainly I don't think I think I'm correct on this, but I don't recall off the top of my head a moment where, say, in any of the lists of disciples, both of those names appear, like Levi at the beginning and then Matthew kind of all the way at the end. Sometimes the multiple names appear, right? Thomas, who is known as Didymus, or the twin, and James and John, sons of Zebedee. Like those things appear here and there, like they come and go, but we don't ever see, Levi at the top of the list, Matthew at the bottom of the list, in some way that should make us go, were there two? And it's the same call, it's the same story, the same call story that Jesus approaches this tax collector sitting at his tax booth, named Matthew in the Gospel of Matthew, named Levi in Mark and Luke. So I think he's the same person. And even if he's not, I'm not fully I don't know what that would change. Right?
In the end, it probably doesn't affect things at all. Among, in my, again, brief kind of researching, glancing, there seemed to be even a little bit of debate amongst some of the early church fathers and writers. But in the end, we're primarily left with this account that seems to conflate the two figures. So I think let's go with the simplest answer, is that they are likely the same person. That makes sense. And as to the potential meaning of the name change, it may or may not be significant. Sometimes when there is, you see it even in the Hebrew scriptures where, the name change truly does mean something. Maybe not, but so this is maybe like not the most helpful answer, but it is. But like most things in the Bible, it's more complicated, or we make it more complicated. But let's go with like the simple thing is that they're likely the same person. The name change maybe doesn't matter that much.
It's not like Saul, who becomes known as Paul, which even in his story, chances are we've maybe made more of that. Like that is probably mostly linguistic as well. But we like to grab onto that meaning because one of the very, like, when God calls Abram, he does say, from now on, you will be called Abraham. Sarai becomes Sarah.
Yeah.
So, there almost is that, like, archetypal name change at the beginning of Scripture that kind of leads us to maybe read more into it.
Yeah.
I think, though, like, it's okay to say that there is significance to it. There can be significance to it.
We just don't know.
And it's not, like... that's not something that I'm going to preach an entire sermon on, being like, this is Levi, and when he was joined to God, then he becomes a gift of God. Like, I'm not going to declare that to be absolutely like an entire sermon's worth of, God's going to get a hold of you and change your name. Like, those things are true. But, I think it's a very small part of this person has a much larger role in what God's doing.
That's good. And so hopefully that's a little helpful for unpacking that, and feel free to follow up if maybe there's follow-up from that. So if it wasn't, if it wasn't, that's right. Okay, so let's jump into this past week now. So you mentioned in the sermon that the subtitle that we've imposed on this is Jesus' question about fasting. But as we got into it, we kind of realized it's about fasting, but it's not really about fasting. So this is on the heels of this party, and then the Pharisees kind of continuing on in their kind of questioning and concern about Jesus and his disciples and their approach to their faith and this ministry, right? And so they say to him in verse 33, John's disciples are fasting and praying; those two things join together. And so do the disciples of the Pharisees, but yours go on eating and drinking, and using these very outward expressions of faith. We unpack that a little bit, but Jesus flips the script and he changes things around. He kind of just upends the discussion and takes it in a totally different direction. Talking through this idea of old and new. That Jesus is, and this is like really like high level summarization. He's like, I'm doing something new and different, and the old stuff can't always come with it. There's going to be old stuff that we're going to need to shed. There's going to be old stuff that we need to let go of because it can't go in the new box, and so I want to, this is actually related to a question that someone else asked, they sent to us, was regarding change and regarding old and new, in that we often cling to the old because it's safe, it feels comfortable. And this is what the person said. They said, I've heard it said that people don't fear change as much as they fear loss. And so they said, can you reflect on that in the context of the statement in Luke 5 that people say the old is better? And that's where we land at the very end, where Jesus says, and no one after drinking old wine wants the new, for they say the old is better. So, they're reflecting on this idea that the old often does feel better. The old often, tastes better. And so, change and loss and... how do we let's talk about that.
So I think questions like this always make me curious. I've heard it said is an interesting way to frame a question. In some ways Jesus uses that language, right? You have heard it said, but I say to you. I always wonder who are you hearing? Are you hearing yourself say it? Or are you hearing other people say it? Or, probably both.
Or maybe it's just sort of like a kind of a presumed truism that is,
Yeah. Are you asking for yourself or are you asking for a friend? But so I think all change is loss.
Yes.
Right? Like I wouldn't actually separate those two. That change by definition is loss, and by definition ought to include grief. That some people are more whether it's like prone to change or enjoy change more. Some people push against change, fear change. Like some people are, more prone to taking risks, and other people are not. Like, I think we all approach it a little bit differently. But I think that to change by definition means to lose something. So I don't think that I would say that, no, we don't fear change, we actually fear loss. I just think change is painful, it's hard, and it includes loss, always. So just to name that, like I think there's no point in kind of pulling them apart and being like, no, it's not change that we actually don't want to deal with. Everybody likes change. It's the loss piece. Well, no, because change inevitably includes loss. So I think you want to hold them together and say, yeah, it is like, this is what Jesus is doing. Is he's honoring, I think, the fact that it is hard and that it does include loss and pain and grief, and it is going to require something of you, and there's a sacrifice. I always say in church, probably in any community, but for our sake in church, change always requires the most of those who have been invested the longest. In many ways, like, and what I mean is emotionally, it requires the most emotionally, because the longer you've been invested in the way things are, the harder it is going to be to catch and capture a vision beyond what you know and what you can see. So that's why I always it's so important to even just honor that reality, that
just to name it,
to name the fact that it is, we realize we're asking more from some than from others. And we're not trying to treat that lightly, but we're also convinced that this is the right direction. So that for me, I think is like, it's an important piece in understanding the role of loss and grief. There's Greek philosopher, is it Heraclitus, who said that the only constant in life is change. Right? To live is to live with change. Like, that's the reality of life. I'm older today than I was yesterday. Right? My knees are weaker today than they were yesterday. And when I fall, it takes longer to feel better about myself.
Rest in peace, your jeans that you showed in the sermon.
Absolutely. Absolutely. They're still in the sanctuary, by the way. Definitely forgot to take them home. I think just to circle all the way back. So change is loss, and that is hard and painful, and also good, and important and necessary. And when we try to resist change because we fear loss, well, the change is going to happen regardless. And so, then we're just drug along for the ride.
So one thing I'm this is poignant for both today, but also when we look at what is happening in Jesus's time, where you can see the religious leaders wrestling with, this has been our spiritual paradigm, this has been our religious paradigm for however many years, and I struggle with, okay, is it the right paradigm, or is it a paradigm that they themselves have created, or some mixture of the two, and it's all just kind of mixed up now? But nonetheless, they are wrestling with it, right? They are like, this is unprecedented for us. It feels like they are worried about abandoning their roots and abandoning what is good and right and true and what they need to hold to, which is why they're struggling so hard with it, right? And we can do similar things today in church context, right? There are lots of things we could point to lots of areas of church life and kind of draw some parallels there. But I don't know, it feels worthwhile to just talk that through a little bit for, what were some of the things that they were wrestling with for in Jesus's time, and how does that relate to today?
Yeah, I think like probably most things, Jesus comes and he says, do not think that I've come to abolish the law. I've not come to abolish it. And he says, not one iota will, pass away.
We're going to come back to that later too.
Yeah, so. Yeah. And what he says is fulfill.
Yeah.
And so, there's a whole way we need to read and understand and think through what it means to fulfill something, bring it to, fullness and completion. Mm-hmm. So it's not simply that everything that's old is now bad inherently, and everything that's new is good. I think that's something that we can easily do, is just think, well, it's old, it's bad, new is good, so away we go. Yeah. Or, we think that every new idea is good. Well, no, probably not. Yeah. Right? Probably not. Yeah. And that's, I think a sin of modern society is to assume that because we exist in 2025, we are necessarily smarter and, more wise than every generation that has come before. There's a kind of systemic arrogance that exists right now with the myth of progress that we are inevitably as a society progressing towards some greater reality in existence,
some utopia.
Yeah. So there have been many people that have pulled that myth apart, I think quite well. Leslie Newbegin would be one who really challenges that. And I think we also just know it to be true. As you grow and age and are challenged and run into different life circumstances, you realize that not every idea you have is great. Not everything that's new is good. So it's not that the Pharisees. It's not that that Jesus comes, he just flips it and everything is gone out the door, away. I do think, like you've said, some of it is that the law, and Paul talks about this, the law had a specific purpose. That purpose is fulfilled in Jesus's arrival, his teaching, in his death and his resurrection. And you can't limit it to just his death and resurrection. It has to include his teaching as well. Yeah. Right? So, all of that. So the law had a purpose. Jesus fulfills that purpose. Some of it, though, I think is that probably, like you've suggested, the Pharisees had created ways of being that weren't, in fact, originally part of what God gave as the law. So if Paul talks about the law as one that is like a safeguard, it is a steward, it is one who it's a caregiver until an appointed time. The implication there is that it is designed to point you toward God and care for you. And when I say you, read more, not you as an individual, but you like a community, people of Israel, people of God, point them toward God. Hold boundaries, guardrails, whatever you want to call that, all so that Israel could be blessed, so that they could be a blessing. And what ended up happening throughout all of Israel's history, and what still happens today, this isn't unique to Israel, the church still wrestles with this, is Israel bumps up against these neighboring nations. And a great example of that is God in the way even the covenant was set up between God and Israel. God holds the sole role as king. God is king. Israel has no king. And then Israel well, we want a king because everybody else has a king. And God's that's not going to go so well for you. That's not how this thing was created, designed, or ordered. And Israel's well, we're pretty sure we want a king. And he's okay, fine. So you have a king, and it doesn't go so great, right? So we see Israel bumping up against neighboring nations, and influence kind of encroaches, and they pull in different practices, ways of being. I think we named on Sunday that in strict observance of the law, fasting was mandatory for the people of Israel on the Day of Atonement. And that's when everyone was expected to fast, the one day where it was required to fast. And the Pharisees took that and said, great, we're going to fast twice a day so that we can be extra perfect. Like if you require it once a year, we're going to do it twice a week because that must make us better. And so to that I say, yeah, that's not, like that's something that's been added after.
Yeah.
And Jesus names that as placing heavy burdens on the people, but not, themselves actually willing to raise a finger.
And you can, you can imagine that there are lots of parallels that we could draw in modern Christianity today. That certain denominations have, and I'm not going to pick on anyone in particular, but there are add-ons, right? That maybe came from a good place, maybe came from a place of a particular theological conviction, but then it becomes the main thing. That it becomes in some ways almost an idol. And maybe just broadly you could say, methods of baptism, or you could say things like that become much greater than the scriptures ever intended them to be, and so we are very prone to this, it feels like, as people.
I think as human beings we like legalism.
We want the strict boundaries and well, let's actually make the boundaries a little even more narrow, and that's going to make sure we don't go beyond the boundaries.
It really, it does. Boundaries are good. There's these really fascinating studies that were done with children playing in playgrounds, and so they I can't remember, I think it was across the US where they did these studies. I could be wrong on that, and that's fine, but essentially what they looked at were playgrounds where kids played that had fences versus playgrounds where kids played without fences. And what they saw was that in playgrounds without fencing at all, any sort of demarcation or boundary, kids stayed very close to the center. They didn't roam. Maybe they stayed close to their parent or caregiver. They didn't know what's in bounds, what's out of bounds, what's safe, what's unsafe, right? And so what it meant was they didn't play as hard. They didn't explore freely. But where there was a very clear, firm fence boundary, they ran everywhere, right up to the fence and back, and just like free reign, because they knew that, hey, within this boundary, I'm safe. So I think there's something about that human beings go, we crave that kind of guardrail boundary. And then what we do is we go, we just bring the fences in even closer, and whether that's out of fear or whether let's build those fences are 6 foot high. Probably a kid's not going to jump it. Let's build it 14 feet high.
Right? It's like a prison.
Put barbed wire all on top. So I think there's something good that we like and actually need about a boundary. And boundaries, I would say, lead to greater life and freedom, because within those boundaries, have at it. But we probably also err then to making the boundaries too small, or the fences too high, or we're like, well, 4 fences are good, let's just double them up. And I think that's what the Pharisees are doing. Here's the thing, we're hard. We talked a little bit about this. We're hard on the Pharisees. I don't even know that it's for a bad reason.
No,
motivation.
Probably not.
Initially, they're like, we want to live a good, righteous life. We want for our people to live a good, righteous life. We've seen what happens when we don't. So away we go. I think what happens is those things become the thing and you forget the original intention behind the thing.
It's almost like, you've lost the heart, and then all of a sudden it becomes almost like codified. And then once it becomes codified, in at least in their minds, not saying it's codified in like law per se, but in their minds it is. And so anything that bucks against that is going to feel like you're losing your heritage in some way, right?
Yeah. So let's play with a couple ideas today, because again, like, we can be hard on the Pharisees, but we do it, like you've said, in the church still.
Yes.
And so I even just to extend fasting, like I see it happen in the conversations around fasting, where it can become, again, this legalistic practice that has lost the intention. Fasting, I said on Sunday, fasting is good.
Yeah.
I actually don't believe that everybody should fast. I don't think it's healthy for everyone. And so even when I say it's good, I worry that some people will hear me say it's mandatory.
Yes.
And Paul's got this language like, even if everything is now lawful, not everything is beneficial. And I do think that that's where community matters, because you've got to bring kind of all your stuff and say, hey, this is who I am, and help me wrestle out whether this is healthy for me or not. So fasting would be one where we just get really strict about it. We must do it. We expect everybody in the church to do it. We don't. That's not our approach to fasting. I think it's good. I think it can be healthy. I think you need accountability. And I think you need people who you give the authority to say, hey, this is no longer healthy in your life.
Yeah.
So like you're tipping, whether that's physically unhealthy, mentally, emotionally, whether that's spiritually unhealthy, you got to have people in your life who can call that out on you, and where you can say, okay, great, like, I appreciate this is hard, but away we go. That's one. Tithing is another thing I think I see. And
that's a good one.
So I would say, like, I think a biblical approach to money is tithing. And I think a good approach is 10%. Like, I think there is very strong argument to be made there that there's an expectation of these things. Again, I see it go, like, I think, so we just reintroduced, like, in-person giving, not in-person giving, but, like, passing a plate.
Which we hadn't done for a long time because of, we had stopped during COVID because we weren't gathering, and then when we reintroduced it, it just really wasn't, like, it didn't feel like it was working well, and
or even like responsible to some degree for a long season.
So it's been, we've since the beginning of the year we've started to do that, and it's actually been good. So
one of the things that I've tried hard to say during each of those services is, like, this isn't mandatory to the degree that, like, you're not paying a due or a fee to access a particular service. And I think we can think of it in those terms. Like, this is my membership fee. This is my Netflix subscription or Disney Plus, whatever subscription. Like, this, it's not that we don't come to it with that kind of again, legalistic, pay first, receive later the blessings. But again, to take that to extreme situations or scenarios, I want to be very clear, we don't do this here. But, I've had conversations with people who have worked at churches where they require their staff to tithe 10%.
Right. And they're looking at,
and they're watching it.
They're looking at the books and saying, hey, I've noticed. I've heard that. I've heard that. And that feels intrusive and it feels bad, and then I also have had colleagues and other people I went to, like, seminary with, who they were working in church contexts that felt like a country club, where they did feel like their tithes and offerings were like a membership due, where they would say, they would be scrutinizing where the associate pastor was going on vacation, be like, well, I'm not giving my tithing dollars to that, so you can go on a nice beach vacation, which
We use money manipulatively in so many different ways,
gross.
Right? Yeah. So like a couple of things that I think are helpful for us to name about our congregation and about our denomination. Like we actually go to great extents, great lengths to limit anybody knowing what anybody gives.
Yeah.
So like I don't know what people give.
Yeah.
When we look at numbers and when we analyze giving trends, we look at category, like ranges of numbers and how many, let's say households or giving units, like how many people, but how many households.
They're broad, high-level statistics, though.
Are within ranges of annual numbers.
Yeah.
Not once do we pass around a sheet that's like this person, this household, this family, like that. We go to great lengths to make sure that people don't know, right? And like there's a problematic trend too that I see where, if someone is unhappy, let's say with change to come back around, that then the leadership will say, well, how much do they give? How seriously do we have to take this person?
Right.
Because they say, well, if they're unhappy about this change and they leave, what are we going to lose? Like, what's the number we're going to lose at the end of the day? And I just go, like, that's such I get it. That's a natural human, this kind of fearful scarcity type mindset to hold. Like, you see how people go there. But never do we want to lead from that place of navigating change or any type of leadership from a position of going, well, if they walk away, how much are they? And the opposite can be true as well. Somebody can say, well, I'm going to leave. And, you're going to lose this, this much money, whatever, unless you make the change that I would like you to make.
Or don't make the change.
Or don't make the change.
I don't want you to make it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we use that manipulatively, and I would say again, like we've lost the plot, right? We've lost the plot of what this was always intended to be.
Yeah.
So here's what I would say to come all the way back to change, navigating it, the grief in it, the loss, the reality that it's difficult. Change is only possible, or I would say healthy change is only possible if we're clear on what we are not going to ever change. So what we need to be crystal clear on is who we are, who God has called us to be, and use the church as the main example here. Like, what are we committed to? What is the hill that we're going to die on?
Yeah.
Like, what's the piece? So, like, death, resurrection of Jesus, bodily resurrection, right? That for me, like, that's a hill that, like, a preacher ought to die on.
Yes.
And as soon as we start preaching this wishy-washy, just spiritual resurrection, emotional renewal. Jesus wasn't really raised from the dead. He was raised only in spirit, not in body. Doesn't really, I'm like, that's it. That's done. Close the doors. Like, that's not ever worth changing. Like, those core theological convictions, those are off the table in terms of change.
Yeah.
Right? We're not talking about those fundamental core theological positions that I think are crucial to Christianity.
Yeah.
Right? The teachings of Jesus and his death, his resurrection, life by the Spirit, what the early church is committed to. Like the day we decide, hey, you know what, the church doesn't really need to be about justice. It's only about butts and seats, bigger, better, like the worship moment. I'm like, okay, again, so close the doors because both of those are necessary, right? Yeah. Like the early church gathered together, they worshiped, they prayed, they read scripture, they taught. There's this whole conversation in Acts between the early apostles who are like, we're running out of time to do this. We need some other, but we also we're committed to this justice, peace, feeding and taking care of the widows, orphans, sick, poor. we need to bring on deacons, so we need to bring on other people. So, so they do that because they're like, we can't lose this for this, but we can't abandon this for this. We gotta bring in more people to help out. And so it's important that we know what those core things are. And it's important that we communicate, hey, these things are not changing. So worship, right? Worship's another great example. I think it is a close to fundamental way of being that we will gather and we will sing together. Okay? So if you look at like life into resurrection, into new heaven, into new earth, all of that, singing, music doesn't cease. It continues all the way through into new heaven and new earth. You know what does? Preaching.
There's nothing left to preach at that point.
Exactly.
That's right.
So even that, right? We ought
That's
to
cool.
always gather and sing and read scripture and pray together. But we do services where there's maybe no sermon. We've done that.
Yeah.
On occasion. And I would say the way in which we sing, the method,
it's going to change.
That's going to change.
It's going to change. And there's a reason we no longer sing, in most contexts, Gregorian chants. Or there's a reason that we don't. I mean, and not that we couldn't do this, but there's a reason we don't just we don't know the melodies that the Jewish people sung to many of the psalms and whatnot.
Right.
So we don't worship in that way either, right? Like there's lots of freedom and flexibility, and yes, there needs to be wisdom in how we approach newness. We don't just always jump in feet first, just assuming you get into trend chasing and you get into I don't always find myself drawn to just chasing trends. However, at some point, we need to be thoughtful about how we approach our modern songs, the ways in which we are encouraging people in our modern worship context. Yeah.
This is where again, I'm influenced by writers like Leslie Newbegin and even like John Mackay. So missionaries at heart and in practice, like in reality, who learned what it meant to culturally translate the gospel.
Yes.
And we need to do that. Right? We can't assume that just because we are speaking the same language, technically, that we're actually translating the message of the gospel in a way that matters and is convicting. And the simplest analogy is, or example of that, when groups of people started translating scripture for communities in Africa, they're like, these guys don't know what snow is. So how are we going to be talking about white as snow? Right? And there needed to be a flexibility with the language in order to convey the truth of the gospel and the truth of scripture. And I think that's what we need to continue to learn is, the mission field isn't on a plane across an ocean. Like the mission field is our own backyard. And we need to learn to translate the gospel in a way that holds the core message of scripture, but that speaks a language that's relevant. I think, what's the line? Like Carey Nieuwhof has the line, married to mission, but the methods change.
Change for sure. And you see that play out in our church contexts today, where you have sometimes an older generation who wants to see what is again comfortable and familiar and old, to use the language of Jesus in his parable here. That's natural, that's normal. What I hope we can do, and this has been my conversation with many folks in our church and other churches, is that I want us to have a mindset that is so committed to a new generation of people knowing Jesus and finding themselves in a community where they can make sense of the gospel, where they can make sense of it. I read this book in seminary where they were unpacking what a church would look like in a closed country in Africa. That's like a Muslim majority country in Africa or the Middle East. and there's this church. They're having to meet in secret, and they're Arabic speaking. They are and how should they do church? You know, and it's this interesting thought experiment of, you know, because we would say, you know, I've had people tell me, well, you need to only sing these kinds of songs or do this sort of thing in your services. Or, conversely, you should only be singing songs by these insert mega church here.
Right.
And so the question is, okay, what about this, you know, this Christian church in this Muslim majority nation? They're meeting in secret. Is the only way for them to worship to sing?
Like, do they have to go and translate all of Bethel's our like catalog?
Yeah, exactly, right?
Right.
Like, is that the thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think the answer is obviously no, right? And in fact, they may take songs that are from their previous spiritual heritage. If they were Muslim and are now Christian, they might take those songs and retranslate those into a Christian context, right? There's so many different ways we should be thinking about this missionally, just spiritual formationally.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So let's come back to the text, because Jesus, and we talked around this idea on Sunday, he's speaking specifically about fasting and feasting, and he says they both have a place inside the kingdom, right? Not in those exact words, but what does he say of he's obviously openly endorsing feasting, right? He's participating in it. There's a place for celebration, and then he says, can you make the friends of the bridegroom fast while he is with them? Like, nobody's going to go to a wedding being like, oh, today's my fasting day. No, they're going to change their fasting day before they go to the wedding, right? Like, right? If you know, I don't typically, like, I'm not fasting on Saturdays. I like making a lot of food, right? And I like eating good food, and I know that's something that you and I talk a lot about. But, you know, nobody's like, if you're going to a party, you're not thinking, well, too bad, you know, it's my fasting day, I'm gonna switch that fasting day, and I'm gonna make sure I can celebrate with the bride and the bridegroom. Like that's what Jesus is saying. And then insert like the full picture. He says, I'm with the church, like I am with you right now. This is a season for celebrating this new life and the kingdom coming into its fullness. People are being healed, and like there's excitement, and there's a place for feasting together. And then he says, but there will be a time, right? The time will come when the bridegroom, so when he will be taken away, and in those days they will fast. And acutely, I think he's talking about his death, that it will be a season for mourning, and for fasting and praying and waiting. Fasting has so much to do with waiting in anticipation for what God is going to do. And so Jesus says, like, both of these practices have a place inside the kingdom. The way in which you approach them and think about them, that's what needs to change. Your heart needs to change. Don't marry the practice, right? Marry the mission and life inside the kingdom, and then go, like, what does this life require of me? What does this love require of me to do? And so I think in our conversations, the healthy way that you approach our music, right? Because we've gotten onto that topic again, right?
It's such an easy lightning rod.
I know. It is.
In a good way, yeah.
The healthy way I think that you approach our music is using this paradigm. I think you naturally use this paradigm because you aren't one to throw out something just like it's old, it's uncomfortable, we don't like it, it's, maybe you do like it, maybe it is comfortable, maybe it's too comfortable, like but it's old and we're only gonna do new, whatever, right? It's, you don't have these clean categories. The question becomes, how would we do it, and why, and what's the meaning and implication, and how does it help us as a community lift high the name of Jesus, and how does it turn our hearts and our minds toward Jesus, right? So many of the hymns do this really well, where, you know, it's focused more on God than it is on me, and you know, maybe if there's an error in sort of, I'm generalizing here, but you know, I think we can focus too much on ourselves, my own personal right experience of God,
But there needs to be this. There needs to be, and this is my theological pet peeve with sometimes how we approach music is that our worship should be both transcendent, that it should be focused on the things of God and above me, but it should also be immanent in that it should feel like there is also something personal and physical about it. Yeah.
So, and isn't that so, like, that's what music does?
Yeah.
In so many ways, in different spaces. Like that is, like, good music does that. It is this beautifully, like, transcendent experience, and also, like, immanent, present, tangible, like, chewy almost, like it is both.
Yeah.
And that's that, like, man, that's that liminal space, though, that worship occupies.
Yeah.
Which is, like, the presence of heaven is thick, right? Like, the Spirit is thick. There's this felt weightiness to what God is doing.
Yeah.
But it's carrying real people along, and you are, like, all of you is there. I don't love this, like, you never suggest this, but I don't love this, like, I just check it at the door, right? Check the brain at the door, check whatever it is at the door. My week might be like, I'm going to forget about all of that, and I'm just going to come, and I'm going to focus on Jesus, and I'm going to worship.
We got to bring it in.
No, it's all of you, and, like, everything comes forward, and, like, that, I mean, that's what all of worship ought to do. But I think certainly that's like, music just creates such a beautiful space for that to happen. But it is. This is the paradigm, or, like, the approach, I think, with which we need to take or move when it comes to these conversations around change is like, again, just very simply, Jesus doesn't say it's got there's no place for that here, right? This is new, don't you know? This is brand new. Like, take your old stuff and go. No, he's like, your heart needs to be changed.
It feels like in the heart transformation, that helps us to discern and determine what is good change versus maybe what is not good change, and because as we start realizing some of our idols and some of the things that we are we find safety and comfort, we'll say, actually, no, there's some good safety and comfort in that, or no, actually there's some unhealthy idolatrous safety and comfort in that. And so like it helps us when our hearts change, when Jesus changes our hearts, we get to experience that.
Yeah. I mean, that's the beautiful thing about community, right? Is that really we can so easily tip into just personal preference, want, wish, comfort, easiness of it, all of it. Like, it's when you bump shoulders with people who are like, actually, like, that doesn't work for me.
Yeah.
You're like, oh, okay, yeah, so we're different here. So I used a TV on Sunday for the first time live.
It's not just a TV though. It's,
right, yeah, it's got writing on top of a smartboard.
It's cool. Yeah.
And the thing that I was surprised by was, I wasn't surprised that it landed for some people. I'm sure it didn't land for some. Didn't hear from those individuals, but I'm sure some people are like, what are we doing? Like, just Bible, away we go. Right? Like, some people have that reaction, but the thing that I noticed was that overwhelmingly so, the type of person who came up and said, oh, I really appreciated that, were current and former teachers.
Who like the visual aids and
who realize that not everybody's brain approaches knowledge, information transfer, teaching in the same way. Like, hopefully the preaching moment isn't just about information transfer, but not everybody receives, hears, embraces information in the same way. And I know that to be true because I'm one of those people, right? Like, I need something in front of me. I can't just listen. And but I was still like, I was surprised and just I think encouraged by that reality, that it's when you rub shoulders, when you bump up against people, that's when you realize that there is so much alike between individuals, and we are so different. And like that's a good thing to remember for me, anyways, as a pastor. Like,
yeah. I think it's Leonard Sweet, who's sort of like a church futurist kind of guy. He says that our worship experiences should be epic, and that's like it's an acronym for not. I mean, maybe they are epic. I don't know, but it's experiential, participatory. That there should be imagery, and there should be connection. And so, and I really like that as a way of testing, because his whole point is that there is a generation that really is looking for something to grab onto that's more than just get up there and talk for 30 to 35 minutes. They want something a little bit more. They want something visual. They want something that they can experience. And so my hope is that in our worship gatherings that we can try to hit some of those, right? And so that we are able to, again, connect. There's a missiological component to this, that we are wanting to connect with those from who are learning differently, who are trying to connect with Jesus in a way that maybe is not my default, maybe not your default, maybe not someone who's in their 80s, maybe that's not their default. But we want to. I hope that we can be a community that strive to find ways of connection for all of us.
Yeah,
it's not always easy.
No, but I think this is the call of community. Also, why we do the podcast.
Yes.
Right? Because we know that some people just listen and prefer to work through these things in their car while they're driving to work.
And just, it's good to say that as you do that, we are working some of these things out in real time as well. We get together as we're setting up. We're briefly talking about some of the things that we'd like to hit on, or we get a question. Okay, how do we want to approach that? But some of this stuff is really working it out in real time, and that's where we'll occasionally have to make a brief correction in the notes or whatever if we've gotten a name wrong or something like that. But yeah, we hope that this is helpful for you. And again, feel free to send those questions. We ideally will need them either Sunday afternoon, evening, or Monday morning. We are generally recording on Monday mornings, and so it's great to have them in advance.
Yep.
So.